monetary-derived corruption into a workable perspective, we will divide these behaviors into three classifications: general crime, corporate crime, and government crime. General crime in a monetary system ranges from petty theft to illegal sales to fraud to violent robbery. This byproduct of the system is often not given the thought needed to understand its source, for many tend to dismiss these so-called criminals as some kind of social anomaly. The reality is that the stress, conflict, poverty, and thus deprivation generated by the monetary system itself is the foundational cause. In the 1990s, a research project called the Merva-Fowles study was conducted, which found powerful connections between unemployment and crime. They based their research on 30 major metropolitan areas with a total population of over 80 million. Their findings found that a 1% rise in unemployment resulted in a 6.7% increase in homicides, a 3.4% increase in violent crimes, a 2.4% increase in property crime. During the period from 1990 to 1992, this translated into 1,459 additional homicides, 62,607 additional violent crimes, and 223,500 additional property crimes. This is very revealing. A person living in a deprived environment with little resources, poor education, and few opportunities for work will simply do what they need to in order to survive, while the neuroses generated from the stress of the situation often leads to violent and socially offensive acts. In other words, the environment is creating the behavior. Corporate crime. Corporate crime, which is almost exclusively profit-related, takes many forms. Planned obsolescence, monopolistic collusion, market manipulation, outsourcing, price fixing, labor exploitation, and government collusion are just a few to note. From Enron's deliberate shutting down of California's power plants to boost its energy stocks, to the Bayer Corporation's knowing distribution of HIV-tainted drugs, it should be clear to most people that corporate crime is constant and oftentimes much more insidious than general crime, for the repercussions tend to affect very large groups of people. The corporate criminal's need to secure profitability is no different in basis than the general criminal's need to survive. While the latter typically commits crimes to live, the former commits crimes to further secure their positions of power, lifestyle, and wealth. It is based on fear. The notion of greed, which manifests from a perpetual insecurity derived from the fear of losing what one has, serves as the motivating factor for most corporate crimes. This neuroses is perpetuated and reinforced by what we could call the luxury stratification that the monetary system creates. For in this system, there is a never-ending progression of products available as one's purchasing power increases. And then there's government crime. Government crime is one of the more complex and difficult forms of conduct to consider, for perception of government is highly modified by the prevailing values this ruling class perpetuates through society. For example, patriotism is often used to encourage support for war, making people feel like they have an obligation to agree with the government's decision. That being said, let's take an objective look at what government within a monetary system actually is and represents. The central role of government is basically the invention of regulatory legislation and policies to handle the functioning of society. Idealistically, the broad interests of the public would be the first priority of government. Unfortunately, as history has shown, this is not, and has rarely been, the case. Rather, government as we know it is actually a parent corporation to all the other corporations working within the country's economy. This, of course, makes sense, for the value of any nation is really determined by the state of its economy. This means that the government has a vested interest in the economic position of its nation, most specifically, with those interests that benefit them directly. Lobbying and contributions in America alone constitute billions of dollars a year, and this money is given entirely under the pretense of putting the donating party's agenda in action. Now, while the examples of government and corporate collusion are vast, the greatest monetarily derived crime of government is its use of war for the benefit of its corporate and financial constituents. In the words of two-time Congressional Medal of Honor recipient Major General Smedley D. Butler, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. Accelerated industrial creation, military contracts, reconstruction contracts, energy and resource acquisition or theft, high-interest, austerity-driven World Bank and private bank loans for post-war economies are just a few of the highly profitable mediums utilized. The true motivation for war today is actually threefold: industrial commercial profit, maximized for the elite; resource acquisition or theft, as was the case with Iraq and Afghanistan; and strategic geopolitical alignment to increase the ease of further industrial profit and resource theft. War is probably the greatest sickness caused by the desire for wealth and power. Government, with its team of brainwashed assassins on hand, is involved in the ultimate form of self-preservation, and as long as the resources of the world remain hoarded and restricted for the material benefit of a few, this pattern of war will never end. Now, these classifications of corruption are only a generalized grouping. Vast nuances of human behavior and everyday life are also very much poisoned by this mechanism for profit. For if you look closely enough, you will see that nearly every act of strategic monetary gain is corrupt by its very construct. It is just accepted as normal by the conditioned culture. And 4. Fiscal manipulation. The currency used today is fiat, which means its value comes essentially from government decree. Monetary value in the fiat system is actually derived from how much money is in circulation within an economy, generally speaking. Just as with any natural resource, the more money that is in circulation, the less each unit of fiat currency is worth. When less money is in circulation, it makes each unit worth more respectively. This phenomenon could be called inflation and deflation, generally speaking. Now, the increase in the supply of money available in an economy is called monetary expansion, while a decrease in the supply of money is called monetary contraction. Generally speaking, the expansion period is usually associated with so-called economic growth, for more money is available and able to be put to use, and often more jobs are thus created. Conversely, monetary contraction is often called a recession or depression, for money is drying up, and hence there is less money to put to use, so jobs are lost and companies fail. Economic growth is typically defined as the increase in the amount of the goods and services produced by an economy over time. However, let it be understood that economic growth is really a zero-sum game. There is no such thing as true economic growth in and of itself, for the underlying mechanism is based almost entirely on the amount of liquidity or money in the system. In other words, if I counterfeit $100 million and give it to you to start a business, and you buy and fix up an old building, hire a team of employees, and start to produce a product that the public buys, this would be considered an expansion of the economy. You have invested in real estate, increased the employment rate, and created new products that others buy, therefore exciting the circulation of currency, hence the consumption cycle. Now, what if the authorities found out that all the money you had used was actually counterfeit, and thus they shut down the whole operation? This would be a contraction of the economy, for the money thus vanishes. Your employees would be laid off, the building foreclosed upon, and the production halted. One should ask, what was the real growth? If the increase or expansion in the supply of money can result in the creation of jobs and production, while the decrease or contraction results in the loss of jobs and production, what exactly was gained and lost? What was the point? Let's now consider how money is created and regulated by the government and its central bank. For this example, we will use the United States and its central bank, the Federal Reserve. The expansion and contraction of the money supply is what really creates the so-called business cycle you hear about in classic economics. This cycle is largely controlled and manipulated by the central bank by way of interest rates. An interest rate is a fee charged to a borrower for the use of credit, or an amount of money. All money in the U.S. economy and virtually every other economy in the world is created out of debt through loans. Every dollar in someone's wallet is borrowed from the banking system. This is important to understand. All money is created out of debt. Thus, the rate by which the money comes into existence depends on how much a person is willing to pay in interest to acquire that loan. The commercial banks base their interest rates on values set by the central bank. When the Federal Reserve lowers its interest rates, so do the commercial banks, and credit or borrowing becomes less expensive. When the Fed raises its rates, credit becomes more expensive, and hence borrowing slows. The point here is that the Federal Reserve has the power to influence the interest rates of all banks. This translates into the power to control the amount of money being borrowed and hence the amount in circulation. And,